All right, as we kind of mentioned on Sunday, praising God for hope and understanding that this chapter, Ezekiel chapter 34, ends, I guess, with a relatively famous renewed covenant of peace to his people, Israel, maybe not to be confused with the new covenant that we think of as new covenant believers or engrafted branches into the family of Israel. He is saying things that remind me more of the rest and relief that come with actual freedom after a period of bondage, understanding that his people are going into 70 years of captivity, but you don't have to be in physical captivity to feel bound and confined by your situation in life. And that's where this chapter hit me. And a chapter that once again seems to break down into roughly 3 sections. I might not make clear distinctions in my discussion of them, but once again, I think the ESV does a good job of breaking the chapter down. So I'm going to go with their 3-section breaks as I go ahead and roughly discuss what's going on in this chapter. The first 6 verses or so describing the way that God is showing Ezekiel how the shepherds of Israel have neglected the flock, which has now scattered. Therefore, in verse 7, going from verses 7 through 10, he is going to talk about the way that since they have not properly searched for that which they have neglected, he is against the shepherds and he will rescue his sheep. Going forward in verses 11 through roughly 16 to say, for thus he himself will search for them, will seek them out and rescue them. Going on to say in verse 13, the way he will bring them out from the peoples that he has gathered, that they have been dispersed to, seeming to refer to the dispersion, and gather them and bring them back home, essentially. He is going to additionally feed them, and similar to what we see or seem to see in the 23rd Psalm, allow them or lead them into places where they will be able to lie down in, as it says there, I think, green pastures, or here, good grazing land, where they shall feed without scarcity. Verse 15 saying, once again, he will be the shepherd of his sheep, making them to lie down again, bringing them back, binding up the injured and strengthening the weak. Ending verse 16 by saying he will feed them in justice, a point I think that will be significant later, as verses 17 through 19 talk about the way he is going to judge between sheep and sheep, rams and male goats. He'll say, as there are some who have been feeding themselves well, not content to feed themselves on what seems to be the best, they have trampled and muddied everything or that which was left for everyone else. Verse 20 going on to say, or verses 20 through 24, going on to give us another therefore. Once again, he's going to say, I myself will this time judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep, those who have been feeding themselves well, leaving little quality for the remainder. Because you push with the side of the shoulder and thrust aside all the weak with your horns till you have scattered them abroad. He's once again going to say in verse 22, he will rescue his flock. Saying in verse 23, he will set up one shepherd for them, calling it David, maybe metaphorically, since David is long since passed on, at least in the flesh, twice. However, he's going to say David is going to be a representative, at least, of the, one shepherd he is setting up for his people. He'll say that in verses 23 and 24 as the last section. Going from verses 25 through 31, we'll say that he will make that famous covenant of peace with them, and the things that stood out about that covenant of peace are the way that he uses that covenant of peace, the rest that he will give them to let them know that he is their God. Specifically breaking it down a little bit further, verse 27 is going to say they will know in the way that he breaks the bars of their yoke and delivers them from the hand of those who have enslaved them. As we mentioned it briefly before, they will no longer be prey to the nations, and they will dwell securely, as in verse 29, he will provide for them. As to the end of the chapter, he will say they will no longer be consumed by hunger and no longer suffer the reproach, or I guess the shame of the nations, as the last 2 verses say, once again. And then they shall know that he is the Lord their God, specifically saying that they will know that this metaphor that he has given is an allegory for the fact that the house of Israel is indeed his, or they are his people, and indeed he is their God. And he is saying in verse 31 in conclusion, in case there's any doubt about the symbolism, and you are my sheep, human sheep of my pasture, and I am your God, declares the Lord God. reminding me, as I said at the beginning, of the way that life itself, whether you are physically in bondage or not, can put you in a position where these words provide you a strong sense of relief. If you feel that, there is something in you that has the potential for something other than where you are right now, then you will understand the relief that God promises here to his people in the way that it really applies to all people, especially as New Testament believers or New Testament people believe in the covenant that he has brought to us. Not simply to give us a heaven later on, but I fully believe that much like an endurance runner appreciates rest maybe a whole lot more than a person who has simply taken a whole lot of time off and been super self-indulgent. Those who have been suffering under the weight of injustice may catch your attention like it caught mine. The fact that he says he will feed them in justice in verse 16. And when he specifically talks about breaking the yoke of oppression or the yoke of bondage that they are under in verse 27, like it caught my attention, it might catch yours as well. And then finally, in terms of doubt, there are times when one of the components of your confinement, however you might feel confined, might have to do with the fact that you just feel like a flat out outcast and you don't fit. And one of the things that he is helping them to understand in these last couple of verses is the fact that they have an identity that might have been lost in all of the, how does he describe it? The reproach of the nations. And so when I emphasize that a little bit, there are times when you might have found yourself in such a position on the margins of wherever you are that you begin to question whether you have value, and if you do have value, what that value might even be. One of the great things I found in this passage, it reminds me that part of the relief that God brings is he reminds us that he does not make any one of us in vain. And so even if we don't understand our purpose, he understands our purpose. And part of the value he restores to us is the closer we draw to him, the less we base our self-esteem on the opinions of people who do not see the value in us, and the more we draw close to the one who created us, who can help us understand how we've uniquely been created to fill some role in this world that we might not even fully understand and might never understand unless we truly draw close to the one who created us. And so in this chapter that reminds his people that even in the depths of their time out, because they've gotten themselves into this situation because of mistakes they've made, he is still offering a ray of hope that not only offers them a greater sense of purpose in their recovery, but offers them freedom from the things that caused them to doubt that they had value in the first place.